Like the Argentinian personality, I started off with hope, but was left disappointed and cynical. Welcome, my Mere Mortalites, to another round of the Mere Mortals book reviews. My name is Kyrin, host of the Mere Mortals podcast, but also this one where I dive deeper into the books that I'm reading to give you the juicy information, some themes that we can reflect upon, and maybe even some books from around the world which might not be in your typical reading calendar, your list. And this one is indeed from around the world, from Argentina, in fact. It is On Heroes and Tombs by Ernesto Sabato, also known as Sobre Héroes y Tumbas in the original Spanish, which is the version that I have here with me. This was published in 1961, and the Spanish language one is about 500 pages in length, and it is dense, it is thick. So it probably took me about 25 hours all up of reading to get through. Now, this book is kind of hard to explain, but in essence, it is a novel of tortured love, of self-loathing and madness. So yes, some tasty themes to jump into. There's 4 sections that it's split up into, roughly about 125 pages to each of them, called The Dragon and the Princess, The Invisible Faces, A Report About Blind People, and An Unknown God. Now, the book itself is very experimental, so it goes into these passages of intermixing other stories of unknown parts, of italicized portions, talking about a kind of like historical running commentary. It's just so many different things going on. And the main characters themselves, they tend to branch out as well. But I can give you the general gist of it, which is the first 2 will follow a kind of on-off relationship between 2 teenagers called Martín and Alejandra, and this takes place in Buenos Aires. The report about blind people, which follows an unknown person, but we later find out is called Fernando, who is kind of obsessed with blind people and thinks there's a secret society related to them and is following blind people and getting himself into all sorts of mishaps. And then a man called Bruno, who is talking about his relationship somewhat with all 3 other characters and just talking, I guess, like a general overview / historical narrative of his own relationship with them. So quite a few things going on for sure. On the actual book itself and the author, I haven't talked about Ernesto Sabato before, and this is because I haven't read any of his books before. Now, he is kind of from the pre-Latin American boom period, so that period was kind of categorized from the, I suppose, like 1970s to 1980s, maybe even dipping into the 60s. So this book was kind of a little bit before that, but I don't think he's really included in that period of people such as Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Carlos Fuentes, Mario Vargas Llosa. Those kind of people who are renowned. Julio Cortázar is also another, and I've reviewed all of those people's books, or one of their books at least, on this channel before. So if you want to know what that period is like, go check out some of those ones. But this is kind of before it, and maybe is kind of a precursor to that. It does share many of the experimental, I suppose, values that a lot of those books have, but I don't think strictly it's within it. He also wanted to burn this book. Apparently, he was unsatisfied with the actual writing. I wouldn't say he's as prolific as many of the others. And he almost burnt this one, but his as usual, it seems to be the wife is the one saying no, don't burn it, like publicize it. And this is the book he's kind of most renowned for. So I got the chance to dive into it in the original Spanish as well, so I can give you some detailed learnings that I've taken from that. We'll go into the first theme, and the only really theme that I took from this was lost hope, damaged people spiraling downwards. Yeesh. What a theme to start off with. So on the surface, it does actually seem more or less okay. The characters do seem, if you kind of saw them at their best period, you'd go, they're just a regular person. It seems like they've got their life in order. Martín is young and in love. Alejandra is beautiful and from a well-off family. Fernando is very charismatic when we see him in his early days. His cousin Georgina is also rich. Bruno seems to be well educated and has a kind of ability to connect with people. I would say most of the characters in it, you'd kind of say, yeah, okay, if you took them in their best period, they just look like a normal human being and maybe even doing better than the average. Then we get into this next phase where, as the book goes on, we start to learn more about kind of intimate details about them and see some what I would call warning signs, but you could probably explain it away as it's no big deal. It's it's a bit strange maybe, but who knows. So when we look at this, we kind of see, all right, Martin's starting to get a little bit obsessed with this girl. He's kind of following around everywhere, trying to find her all the time. She herself is kind of bipolar a bit. She mixes between these periods of anger and even relatively early on in their relationship, they both start looking back at earlier periods as being like, oh, the golden times, wow, what an amazing period that was. So we kind of start to see, okay, some warning signs there. With Fernando, when we dive into his past, we see, oh, okay, there's kind of some like ethical mishaps going on here. He has this kind of obsession with torturing animals. That's a bit of a warning sign. He's got this. He's very charismatic, and he kind of seduces this girl, and then he also seduces her mother, and is playing around with both of them at the same time. Marries one of them, squanders all her money. Okay, yeah, this is kind of like not looking so good, and yeah, we just see these warning signs, but most of the characters, they kind of just play it off. It's like, okay, that's it's not the worst thing in the world. I'm not going to cut ties with this person completely. And then we get to just these explosive actions where it kind of like dials up from 0 to 100 pretty quick, or well, we've already seen the warning sign, so maybe from 10 to 100. I'm going to jump here to page 236, and this will be very different if you're reading your version of this book, because the Spanish language, I believe, is about 25% larger than English. So for this would probably be around page 270 or 80 in your version. And I'm going to try and translate this on the fly from English into English as well, so bear with me. And basically, we start off with Martín and Alejandra, and they're having these problems, and basically, like, she's telling him, I think we should break up. I don't want to be with you anymore. And so Martín started to look at a brown spot that had appeared upon his jacket, a dirty jacket. He said, good. No, she says, and good. I don't know. Neither did I want to have you, to have one of those famous moments with you. I understand, Martin, that we have to basically break up on a good note. Something is not working here. And to be frank, to be honest, I think it would be best if we just stop seeing each other completely. He looked at her, and the tears had dried from his face, or they started to flow from his face. And he says, good. He says, if you leave me, I'm going to kill myself. Just straight up, bam. She looks at him with a grave expression, and afterwards, with a mix of hardness and melancholy in an accent, said, I don't know what I can do about that, Martin. And he says, it doesn't matter to you that I'm going to kill myself? She says, of course it matters. It goes on. This is actually harder to translate than it normally is for me. But we see this kind of ramping up of him just going, I'm going to kill myself. And then he goes on to explain, like, oh, what would you do if I threw myself in front of a train in Retiro, which is a place in Buenos Aires, or like a train stop. And yeah, this just happens more and more. There was portions where he's kind of sleeping with her in a room, and he tries to caress her, and she just explodes in this anger and fury, like, no me tocas, don't touch me, and goes wild. the Fernando, we come to this report about blind people, and we don't know his name there and his relation to the other characters. And I won't particularly spoil that because if you're reading the book, it's kind of an important point that occurs midway through. And he has this quest, I suppose you'd call it, about blind people, this obsession where he starts thinking like, it's not that he starts thinking, he is thinking, and we just capture him in a moment in time where he is staking out this blind person's like hotel or where they live. He's following them during the day. He's getting other people to report about the movements of this blind person. He's trying to delve deeper into the society and understand how these blind people all, this network is creating, like it's basically like, imagine the Illuminati but for blind people. It's kind of what's going on, and how there's a difference between people who were born blind and who became blind from an accident or things like that later on in their life, and the various levels. And he's breaking into these hidden mysterious places, and then he goes on this like amazing quest where he gets captured, escapes through this tunnel, and then sees this almighty like two towers and this godlike figure in front of him, and he's kind of worshipping. It gets very, very strange very quickly. So we kind of see that, okay, like what I would take from this is we're really seeing damaged people, and they're going downwards, they're spiraling downwards. We're not seeing improvements of these people in this book. So even all their associates are kind of messed up as well, and we get all of these side characters who are doing, they only appear briefly, but one guy called Border de Nave, he wanted revenge on Alejandra for something like being too pretty or being too rich, or she thought she was better than him, or he thought that she thought she was better than him. And so he, is trying to get revenge on her. There's this really weird scene where we're learning about Fernando's past and how he had traveled to Paris, and there was this old couple, I believe they sounded old, but I could have got this wrong. And basically like this man was very abusive towards his wife, and basically tied her up on the bed one day and had sex with another woman in front of her to punish her. We then learn that she pushes him down a set of stairs and paralyzes him. And then constantly from then on, because he's paralyzed, she just brings random men into her room and has sex with them in front of her as like a continual revenge punishment. And Fernando's kind of obsessed with her and learning more about this couple, and this kind of might be his starting of the madness into this descent about learning about blind people and paralyzed people and things like that. It's actually very reminiscent of the kind of plotline of Thérèse Raquin, which a French novel by Émile Zola, which I've covered on this channel before, and I think it's definitely worth checking out because that book reflects this in many ways of this kind of theme of damaged people and madness. So what can we all take away from this? Well, the only thing I would really be able to comment on this is just some people are so messed up that they will drag you down, and the best thing is just to stay away from them. This is not a story of it's brutal, but it reflects the book. The book kind of has these moments of, okay, things seem kind of normal, and then it's just, it goes worse. Like as the book goes on, everything gets worse. Nothing improves for anyone. And I think the only thing you can take away from that is that there is damaged people out there, and if you'll have to prepare yourself mentally, physically to try and to fix damaged people, and sometimes there's no helping them. But that's a kind of irrelevant issue, a side topic for this book, which is really just examining this descent into, I guess you'd call, madness for many of them. So let's go on to my own observations and takeaways while we're at it. The second half of this book is unlike the first half. So when I started this off, I was actually giving it some praise and whatnot. I was saying, wow, okay, yeah, it's kind of experimental, it's kind of weird, but I get it. This kind of makes sense. And then the second half of it just became more obscure, more bizarre. introducing random stuff in that's talking about communists and anarchists, and I was just going like, okay, what's the point of this? This had never come up before. This seems really irrelevant. At the start, it seemed like a very intriguing book. It captured my interest because it kind of hinted at a bad ending, but we're still seeing the goodness, the fruits of this relationship developing and whatnot. And I was like, oh, okay, so what's going to happen? How is this going to end badly? And then just additional characters get thrown in, and then random storylines, and then we start learning about all these different things. It just goes, okay, the first half is not like the second half of the book. Now I'm always willing to admit my own mistakes here in my reading of it. So one, I'm not a fluent Spanish speaker. I'm conversational. I get it. But there was plenty of times in this book where I was looking up words in particular. It's an Argentinian book, so there's a bunch of lunfardo, which is kind of the Buenos Aires dialect, there's slang words that they put in there. And, there was definitely some words which were kind of even untranslatable because I just didn't have access to the exact meaning of this word, although you can infer it. And then I was reading this over probably a period of 3 or 4 months, and the reason for that was because I was starting to enjoy it less and less. So this wasn't a constant reading for me, so that also can influence the I suppose overall impression that the novel has left on me. What I will say it's good for, it's great for stereotypes. Stereotypes particular of the Argentinian character. Alejandra, I think, is absolutely nailed spot on. My own observations of the 4 months that I was in Argentina was, she's pretty a pretty good reflection of the Argentinian teenager girl, and that this kind of, she has the Latina spirit, but also mixed with a kind of inwards looking insecurity almost, that you would say. There's passion, there's jealousy, there's beauty that, I felt she reflected an Argentinian character really, really well. And even in the book, there was a period, there's a particular sentence, I really wish I'd written it down, where the narrator makes a note that the typical Argentine is cynical, but this was because they started off with a lot of hope, and then the world and their own country has kind of crushed them somewhat. And I think that's pretty a reflection as well of what I had taken away from Argentina. I thought they were an amazing people, but also somewhat cynical for, it's just what happens when you live under a government which is suboptimal with a lot of corruption, and your currency is devaluing super quickly. It causes all sorts of weird relationships between people and companies and the environment and the atmosphere of a place. So I thought this book, even though it was published 70 years about 70 years before I was there, 60 years, it's pretty reflective of what my impression of Argentina was like. So a thumbs up for that. Also a thumbs up for Buenos Aires. The descriptions of the city, of the places that the characters were going to, I thought were excellent and reflective of someone who has lived there. So that was really good. And, there was small snippets of Borges. Jorge Luis Borges appears as a kind of cameo character for a little bit, which I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's kind of what it would have been like at the time when he was living there. This is, the atmosphere that was painted around that I thought was great, as well as a character, Laval, which was an Argentinian general who, this is the weird stuff where it's this historical fantasy based on a real life person, where it's talking about his death, and it's just adding all these random snippets in right at the end where it's kind of confusing. I didn't see the point of that, but the idea behind it and the historical context I thought was kind of cool. And even just select passages of the actual writing itself, there's a difference you get in the Spanish language, which is hard to convey in English, but it's a lot more poetic, I guess I would say. If I had to say anything, that the poetry of the Spanish language leads itself to a more poetic kind of vibe. And if you check out the end of month book recap, I'll read out a couple of passages, which obviously won't make that much sense because they're going from Spanish into English, but I still think are kind of reflective. So let me give a summary. Overall, this book spiraled downwards, much like the main characters. What was an intriguing mystery of broken love became a mess of random interjections and irrelevant sub-stories of side stories. It has its merits, but these are outweighed heavily by the longer you spend with it, I guess I would say. So be very prepared for your initial impression of the book to change once you've read the full way through. And to be honest, I kind of wish I hadn't read the full way through. It was I just invested so much time that I went, okay, I'm just going to finish this off. So overall, on Heroes and Tombs by Ernesto Sabato, I'm going to give a 4.5 out of 10. Not my favorite read ever. Not my favorite. And so that is it for today, my mere mortalites. Thank you for joining me to this part of the video. What are your thoughts on the Argentinian writing of Ernesto Sabato? Have you read this book? Have you read any of his others? Did you feel it was reflective of the Argentinian character? Am I missing things? What did you take from this book? I would love to know all of that stuff. So best way is to just leave a comment down below. I always enjoy seeing them and responding to them. But you can also go check out the Mere Mortals podcast. I tend to reflect some of these thoughts and readings upon that podcast in conversation with my co-host Juan. And then if you're also really intrigued about supporting us, then I would just go to the www.meremortalspodcast.com/supporter, and you can learn how you can help out supporting these book reviews and the time and energy I spend in this. I follow the value for value model. If you enjoy this podcast for these videos, what I'm doing here, I just ask that you send that back, and you can do that by sharing. You can do that with a payment of cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, and send a message through directly to me, which I read out in the end of month book recaps. There's all sorts of things you can do. So once again, very much appreciated for joining me, and I do hope you're having a fantastic day wherever you are in the world, and that you're not spiraling down into madness, and that you have hope in your life. Kyrin, out.